Hi, I'm actually a trained archaeologist. Normally I make videos about history, archaeology, about long lines of humanity, about what remains. And usually I present them from this very place. But this is precisely why I keep coming back to music. Because if we ask what will remain of the 20th century, music will surely be part of it. I was born in 1964, the very year the Beatlemania really exploded. And if we had to name one act that stands really for the 20th century, it would possibly be the Beatles. For those who are interested in this, on my channel you will find many such cultural, historical reflections. Feel free to take a look. This video is dedicated to Vito and Aigrim. You have listened your way to the entire Beatles cosmos. All albums, anthology, Get Back. And at some point you are faced with the bigger question. Why do the Beatles actually stand outside of any competition? Of course, the Beatles were first of all a very good live band. This was the prerequisite. But through fortunate circumstances and through the decisions they made, they became a historical special case. Two of those good decisions were called Brian Epstein and George Martin. The first because he took the Beatles seriously. The second because he did not impose artificial limits on them, but encouraged them to experiment. Within 8 years, from 1962 to 1970, they went through more stylistic stages of development than most bands do in an entire career. From simple rock and roll, psychedelia, studio experiments, orchestral arrangements, and almost avant-garde sound collages. And they were first with many of these things. The crucial point is, everyone knew it. Other bands accepted this special status. If you wanted to be relevant in the 60s, you had to orient yourself towards the Beatles. You had to listen to what they were doing. You had to react to it. But that had a downside. The music industry of the 60s was built around the Beatles. That was inspiring, but also limiting. And it's probably no coincidence that after the end of the Beatles, in the early 1970s, creativity in pop and rock music practically exploded. Progressive rock, hard rock, glam, punk, new wave, electronic music. Every band discovered its own niche. Niches that had been at least pre-imagined by the Beatles. One could say, the end of the Beatles was a liberation for many musicians. Only then could truly independent paths develop. At the same time, the respect remained. When musicians are asked, then and still today, the Beatles are often the reason why they started music at all.
It's great to me, man. It's been a lifetime ambition of mine. You guys made me start music, you know.
Yeah. After the burglary?
Probably the first band that I was really into was the Beatles, and then all that top 40 radio. But at a really early age, I wanted to be a rock and roll star. I wanted to play drums, ever since I got my first Beatles record.
The most important thing about the Beatles, and with me, John Lennon in particular, he was my favourite kind of English songwriter, performer, singer. And the fact that they were English was incredibly important, because before that, most English music was really awful.
They were my idols, and they did it. It wasn't synthetic. It wasn't, put together for Hollywood. The Beatles looked like working class guys. They had an attitude. I guess being from Liverpool, that's a working class town. And when we saw these guys on TV, we said, wait a minute, they don't look like Fabian. They don't look like Frankie Avalon. They don't look like Elvis. They look like regular guys, like people you would have hung out with.
Do you remember the first time you heard I Want to Hold Your Hand?
I sure do. I was at my mother-in-law's house in West Hollywood, California, and on they go, and here they are from England, from London, England, the Beatles. I want to hold your hand, you know, everything. Oh, I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it.
She Loves You was the next one.
Oh, She Loves You was fantastic.
I Want to Hold Your Hand came on the radio in 1964. That was going to change my life because I was going to successfully pick the guitar up and learn how to play.
They were the first white group that I had ever heard in my life. The first white artist ever of their magnitude that I had ever heard in my life. Say, yeah, we grew up listening to black music. We love Motown. We listen to black music. We don't love this person, this one. No other white artist had ever said that. Not anyone of magnitude until the Beatles said that.
The Beatles really created the blueprint for the rock band, you know? I feel like there were 4 members. Each of them were brilliant musicians and songwriters. And as a kid, that's just how I learned to be a musician. I had a guitar and I had a Beatles songbook. And I swear to God, I think still to this day, that's all a kid needs to learn how to play music. If it weren't for the Beatles, I don't think we'd be here.
All of us go back to the Beatles. We all go back to 2 things, Chuck Berry and the Beatles. And Chuck Berry is your rock, you know, sort of like foundation. The Beatles are, listen to any album and tell me those aren't perfectly written songs. So Ozzy and I both agree on this. Ozzy sits there and he says, man, if you don't listen to the Beatles, you can't write a song. And I said, I believe that religiously. So I tell young bands all the time, they say, what should we do? And I go, listen to the Beatles' first album. And they go, why? I said, because that's how a song's written.
I mean, I'm in awe of McCartney. He's about the only one that I am in awe of, but I'm in awe of him. I mean, he can do it all. And he's never let up, you know. He's got the gift for melody. He's got the rhythm. He can play any instrument. He can scream and shout in it as good as anybody, and he can sing a ballad as good as anybody, you know. So, and his melodies are you know, effortless.
John was a particularly good friend of mine. Yeah. Stories that cannot be told. Yeah, anyway. And George, that is a lovely guy. Yeah, I mean, we got Paul and Ringo. Paul was a songwriter par excellence. Ringo, what a guy. I mean, what a steady backbeat, man.
The only person I wish I had met was John Lennon, because he's the one that I did idolize, and I just thought he was just a very beautiful human being. And I'm sad to say that I didn't get to meet him. He's the only one.
It's a sort of fascinating kind of piece of history. Oh my goodness, we were in Abbey Road when they were making Sgt. Pepper, and we were making our first album. And it came out, and we were driving up to a gig somewhere in the north of England in a Zephyr 6, and June Child, who was driving us, pulled over into a lay-by when it was about, and we sat in a lay-by and listened to Sgt. Pepper, and I was just, hey, this is an amazing piece of work. And it was, and it is, obviously.
How much influence do you think that the Beatles exert on today's breakout of rock music generally?
I don't know about today. Certainly at the time, you know, the social question poised by the Beatles, you know, the long hair and this, that and the other, as it was called long hair then.
But of course in long hair we've only recycled again, haven't we, in fashion? Really?
Well, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, sure.
And it only got cut off because of the wars and lice and things like that.
That's right, yeah.
But I think at the time, you know, it certainly a lot of change went down, a lot of social barriers. Again, we broke it down, class barriers, even though it may have been resented afterwards, but nevertheless, they helped to do that. And over the years that they were very musically prominent and productive. And I think there's a classic example of a group who shows so much development and maturity within their music within the years that they were together. I mean, let's face it, the early records aren't, they're nothing to really write home about, but by the time they're at Magical Mystery Tour, I mean, it was really going some, really.
Not admiration in a fan sense, but recognition of a historical exception. Against this background, a new question arises. If one singles out an individuum within this cosmos, why does one so often end up with Paul McCartney? I think he's a cool guy, but this is a matter of taste. More important is something else. He may be the most creative of the Fab Four, at least over the long run. Over almost 70 years, he has produced a musical catalogue like hardly anyone else. After the Beatles came another 27 studio albums with the Wings or as a solo artist, plus at least 12 live albums and a handful of official compilations. Among his works are also 5 classical compositions, film music and electronic experiments. 22 times after the Beatles, Paul had a #1 hit in the UK. In the United States, he reached the top of the charts around 32 times. What distinguishes McCartney is an almost inexhaustible melody gift. The ability to write melodies that are catchy but not trivial. In other words, they often sound simple, but are frequently built in complex ways. Penny Lane is a good example. And he has done this for more than 6 decades. Add to this his presence in pop culture. A James Bond theme song.
Yeah.
References in literature, film and television. His music is so deeply embedded in everyday culture that we often no longer consciously notice it. So if one asks who might be the most significant individual artist of the 20th century, McCartney is not an absurd candidate. Hardly anyone has ever achieved comparable breadth and longevity. John Lennon is a different case. Lennon had enormous expressive power, immediacy, a clear authorial voice. One thought is important here to me. In the 1970s, all three, John, Paul and George, consciously distanced themselves from the Beatles. With Lennon we see a turning point in 1980. Double Fantasy sounds like a return to himself. Less political activist, more songwriter. More melody, more intimacy. In the 1980s, Paul and George follow this path as well. After the phase of distancing, their music becomes audibly more Beatle-like again, more song-oriented, more melodic, more clearly structured. Lennon was therefore not at the end. He was at the beginning of a new phase of maturity. George Harrison, in turn, was perhaps the most internally coherent character of the four. An outstanding guitarist, a very good songwriter, spiritually oriented, and he had something to say. But he had less drive for constant reinvention, less stylistic breadth. As a solo artist, he was strong, but not expansive. He was a supporting pillar of the Beatles, but not a dominant engine like John and Paul. And that brings me to my final thought. We do not have to decide who the greatest Beatle was. These four people loved each other, as they repeatedly emphasized in interviews. They argued, yes, but they respected one another as artists. Musically, they functioned perfectly as a unit. As solo artists, they were very good. One of them even extraordinarily good. Perhaps this is the real miracle of the Beatles. Not the greatness of the individual, but the uniqueness of the constellation. Vito, Aigrim, I wish you a great success with your channel and many more exciting musical journeys. And keep the Beatles as an inner reference point. Because if you know the Beatles, you understand pop and rock history better. Stop! Before I end, one small, very personal add-on. If you want to explore the solo years after the Beatles, these are a few albums I would especially recommend. For John Lennon, Double Fantasy. Here John sounds like himself again. Reflective, melodic, direct. And Yoko Ono's contributions capture a raw New York avant-garde energy. For Paul McCartney, Flowers in the Dirt. Because of the collaboration with Elvis Costello, which at times echoes the old Lennon-McCartney dynamic. It's a consistently strong, song-driven album. For George Harrison, Cloud 9, a late career highlight with several excellent songs and clear Beatles reminiscences. And for Ringo Starr, Ringo, not least because all three former Beatles contributed to it. If you start there, you get a very good picture of how each of them carried a different part of the Beatles' legacy into their solo careers. So that's it. Thank you and bye.